OECD webinar on a methodology for gender mainstreaming in the EU budget. The Socialists and Democrats, the OECD group, and in the end of the day, the European Parliament fight for the promotion of the gender equality as an horizontal principle in the framework of the pluriannual EU budget, the MFF 21st-27. But it was and it is clear for us that principle is not enough. We must ensure long-term improvements on gender equality. It's why, on equality between men and women, the promotion, implementation, and monitoring of relevant programs and the mainstreaming, including gender impact assessments and the development of a methodology to measure the relevant expenditure at programs level, was introduced. It's why we are here today in this political debate. I thank first the panelists, Commissioner, General Director for Budget in the European Commission, OECD and the European Agency for Gender Equality officials. But also, I thank all the participants coming from different organizations, from different countries, to be here with us to debate this so important subject. I'll start, as usual nowadays, with some technicalities. You can listen to and speak in English or French. A Q&A session follows. All the participants can, since now, either ask the floor by raising your hand or in the chat, or write your question in the chat. When the floor will be given to you, you must press your speak button down in your screen. So, without any further delay, I give now the floor to Helene Fritzon, Swedish MEP and Vice President of the OECD Group, who, on behalf of the OECD Group, will welcome all of you to our webinar. Helene, please, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Margarida. I'm in Stockholm, and I'm very pleased to be with you today and to warmly welcome you all to this important webinar on gender mainstreaming in the European Union budget. We have had an interesting program ahead of us, and we are going to listen to many excellent speakers today. But before we start, I would like to give you a picture. I would like to tell you about my granddaughter. She is a curious 7-year-old who just started school. Like all children, she should have a future full of opportunities in front of her. But if we continue at the current pace, she will be 67 years old when the European Union has reached gender equality. 67 years. That means she will probably live her entire adult life with a lower salary than her male colleagues. She will not have the same possibilities to be part of decision-making, and she will be at greater risk for being exposed to gender-based violence. The pandemic has most likely not shortened the time it will take to reach gender-equal European Union. EU research from EIGE and Eurofond show that the social and economic impacts of the COVID-19 crisis threaten to roll back recent progress in gender equality. Maybe my 7-year-old grandchild will never experience gender equal European Union at all. And therefore, for the S&D Group, gender equality is a top priority. We fight for equal pay and pension, equal access to the labor market and career opportunities, and a life free from fear, sexual harassment and violence. Gender equality is also one of the European Union's fundamental values, and we finally have a gender equality strategy with common goals. But fundamental values and strategies do not automatically result in gender equality. All commitments must translate into concrete policies and allocation of resources. Gender mainstreaming and gender budgeting must be integrated in all policy and processes. And we know about the climate transition as one example, is no exception. Girls and women should around the world are harder hit by climate change. And yet women are underrepresented in decision making. The future of our planet is at stake, and it affects every one of us. To do the climate transition, to achieve the European Union's climate goals, to make a green transition that is just and inclusive for all. And to do that, we must integrate a gender equality perspective when decisions are made and resources are distributed. Gender budgeting is not only an important tool for gender equality, it is necessary that we use it if we want to achieve our gender equality objectives and build a strong and sustainable Europe. It must be part of every budget process from the very start. So today we will examine state-of-the-art practices when it comes to gender mainstreaming and how to develop a methodology to measure gender expenditure, including the promotion of gender mainstreaming in the MFF. Let us keep the children in our minds when we talk about these important issues, because my 7-year-old granddaughter and the rest of the children around Europe should not have to wait 60 years for gender equality and equal opportunities. Gender equality is not just a woman's or girl's issue. It benefits everyone and our society and must be at heart of our work. So again, I really look forward, and I will say warm welcome to everyone to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, for your inspiring words. As you remember, gender equality is a key ambition and a key policy in the European Parliament, in the European Union. The European budget is the privileged instrument for turning words into actions. The SED group wants to see gender equality enshrined not only as a horizontal principle, this is an acquis since a long time ago, but as a practice in all the European policies and member states. Of course, gender equality has not yet been achieved in practice. As I said in the beginning, we demand it in the decision on the MFF 21-27. And now, we will do everything to make this commitment a reality. The European Commission has still to develop a methodology for the application of gender mainstreaming in the EU budget. The purpose of this webinar is in fact to assess how, in the light of the new MFF framework 2021-2027 and the Next Generation EU, we can actually reduce the inherent gender inequalities that exist in many policy areas and countries, often reinforced through decisions on how public research, European money in this case, are allocated and used. We have a huge responsibility on the spending of the European money. In November 2020, in the MFF negotiations, the Parliament achieved the introduction of equality between men and women as a new horizontal principle of the EU budget. In the interinstitutional agreement, we were able to push further, and the Parliament secured the design of a methodology to measure gender expenditure, including promotion of gender mainstreaming. The Commission has committed to examine how to develop a methodology to measure gender-relevant expenditure at program level and to use that methodology as soon as it is available. This way, we want to ensure that gender equality considerations are systematically taken into account when a single euro of the EU budget is spent. That the methodology is developed and implemented, that the methodology is sound, transparent, and credible. In addition, we want that by 2027 and at the end of the current MFF, we will know exactly how the European money was spent to reduce gender inequalities and how gender equality was promoted. In the recent European Court of Auditors report, the special report on gender mainstreaming in the EU budget, Time to Turn Words into Action, the Court concluded that the Commission's strategy for gender equality had not yet been realized. Thanks the rapporteur, but also a later word to Judge João Figueiredo, unfortunately no longer with us. I know he was also an activist on this topic. The Court found that in the 2014-2020 MFF, only 21.7% of the EU programs had gender-related indicators. This is 236 billion out of the 1,087 billion. This is unacceptable for us. We want to make sure we know how the 1.8 trillion euros of the current MFF and the Next Generation EU are spent in policies that are promoting gender equality and regressing inequalities practices. The Court recommended that the Commission systematically collect, analyze, and report on existing sex disaggregated data for the EU funding programs, use gender-related objectives and indicators to monitor progress, develop a system for tracking funds allocated and used to support gender equality, and report annually on the results achieved in terms of gender equality. I know we have participants from the European Court of Auditors today. I hope we will hear from you on the debate later on. As we know, gender mainstreaming and gender budgeting are current practices in some EU member states, generating awareness about how policies included in the budget impact people differently and addressing equality promotion. In fact, under the National Recovery and Resilience Plans, we are demanding to know how member states spend their money in order to reduce gender inequalities and promote gender equality. We believe that a webinar on the state-of-the-art methodologies for gender impact measuring is a good and timely kickstart. We need to reflect, discuss, and decide on moving forward. We have in our hands the highest overall budget of the EU history. Let us make sure that the MFF, Next Generation EU, Recovery and Resilience Facility, and all EU financial resources consider gender from now on. So, now I give the floor to Commissioner Helena Dalli. Thank you very much to be here with us. And I'd like to welcome you. I give the floor to you for 8 minutes, if possible. Thank you very much, Commissioner. The floor is yours.
Thank you and good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. So, gender equality is a core value of the EU, a fundamental right and key principle of the European Pillar of Social Rights. So, from the start of President von der Leyen's mandate, the Commission has been fully committed to promoting gender equality. Through the launch of the gender equality strategy, gender mainstreaming has been key in all EU internal and external policy areas and initiatives, including in matters related to budget and financial tools. Thanks to the creation of the Equality Task Force, the Commission ensures all policy initiatives are as conducive as possible to gender equality. One of the most recent examples in this year's updated Better Regulation Guidelines to ensure that ex ante impact assessments of all relevant spending programs duly consider the effects of gender equality. Gender equality and mainstreaming will only advance if we all prioritize and implement such an approach. Thanks to the agreement of the Parliament and the Council in giving the Citizens' Equality, Rights and Values programme an additional €912 million, the allocated €1.5 billion budget represents the biggest ever support to fundamental rights inside the EU. The 2021-2027 multi-annual financial framework promotes gender equality through dedicated gender equality actions and programs, such as the Daphne strand of the SERVE program. Other major programs, such as Erasmus+, European Social Fund Plus, or even programs whose principal objective is not promoting equality, include provisions for strengthening and mainstreaming gender equality. Furthermore, 85% of all new actions throughout external relations will be gender responses, with 5% of them having gender as principal objective under the Gender Action Plan 3. In order to improve measures, the Commission services are working on a systematic equality data catalogue to identify available information as well as potential data gaps so that we can, in due course, carry out an assessment of the effects that EU financing has had on gender equality. In line with the interinstitutional agreement accompanying the 2021-2027 multi-annual financial framework, the Commission is developing a methodology to measure the contribution of each relevant program to gender equality. Our plan is to test this methodology on some programs in 2022 and use it for reporting as of 2023. Also, as part of the EU's Recovery and Resilience Facility, the financial tool to rebuild our economies, the Commission asked Member States to put gender equality at the heart of its national recovery plans. We have observed some positive contributions to the national plans, with, for instance, significant investments in childcare facilities and long-term care. Recently, the European Court of Auditors, as you have already mentioned, published a report on gender mainstreaming in the EU budget. The Commission shares the ambitions set out in this special report and agrees that we can improve our work based on the shortcomings identified in several areas concerning gender equality in the 2014-2020 multi-annual financial framework. In order to do so, and as highlighted to the European Court of Auditors, we need to identify the best methodology to implement some of the necessary steps. The work done on the MFF, the RFF, or specific spending programs are all critical steps to inspire us for future spending. And financial frameworks by identifying and building our best practices and setting clear objectives indicators and targets for gender equality. I thank Margarida and Ada for their work on the RFF and the MFF. We need to continue translating our political priority of gender equality into concrete actions. Together, we can make important contributions towards promoting gender equality in the EU and beyond, and ensuring that thanks to a fair allocation of resources, all women and girls, in all their diversity, can equally lead, thrive, and be free. I thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, having shared with us your goals as Commissioner in charge of equality. And thank you also to share with us your points and your priorities. And we know that we can work together with you on how to improve gender budgeting. So now I move to Mr. Gert-Jan Koopman. Gert-Jan is the Director General for Budget in the European Commission with specific responsibilities, and also Mr. Koopman was with us during the MFF negotiations when we took some compromises. So, as Director General for Budget, you will be responsible for developing and implementing a gender mainstream methodology as agreed in the MFF decision and the interinstitutional agreement no later than January 2023. Gert-Jan, please, the floor is yours for 8 minutes.
Good morning, Margarida. Good morning, colleagues. I am delighted to have been invited to this seminar, which indeed picks up on a very important theme, which you yourself have managed to put very prominently in the interinstitutional agreement on the MFF, and which, as recalled by previous speakers, is actually of fundamental importance to the Union. We in DG Budget are, of course, tasked with taking forward a number of important elements in this context, and I'm very happy today to tell you a little bit about where we stand with some of this. If we can go to the next slide, I would like simply to echo what Commissioner Dalli has already said about the priority which the von der Leyen Commission attaches to gender equality. She herself is the first commissioner for equality, and the creation of a dedicated task force is also testimony to the importance we attach to the subject, as is the 2020-2025 gender equality strategy. Of course, it is clear that gender equality is a fundamental value and principle of the EU, but it is also an economic requirement, an opportunity for all of us to advance the well-being of all of our citizens, and to, on the back of that, also have a wider economic benefit for society at large. So gender equality from many different perspectives is important, and a lot of work is still to be done going forward, particularly in the budget. And if I can have the next slide, I would like to emphasize two elements in this context. First, the importance of gender mainstreaming, where, let me be very honest, we are at the start of what I hope will be a productive journey towards better mainstreaming, which effectively would require the integration of a gender perspective into all the different aspects of the budgetary cycle, not just the design and preparation of programs, but also, and I think that's really critical, the implementation and later on the monitoring and evaluation. Now, secondly, as referred to by Mrs. Marquez, the introduction of a gender mainstreaming approach is recognized in the interinstitutional agreement, and a key feature of this naturally is the importance of actually tracking and tracing expenditure in the MFF. I'll say more about that because I think that ultimately measuring very concretely what is done, being able to monitor it, to evaluate it, and then to assess it is critical. What measures gets done normally. Before getting to that, however, if I can have the next slide. Next slide, please. I would like to refer to a number of other important strands in the context of the EU budget, notably the updating of the better regulation guidelines, which of course means that our impact assessments will duly consider the effects on gender equality. That's very important. It's something for the long haul because obviously this relates to Commission proposals that are accompanied by impact assessments. It will then go into the decision-making process between Council and Parliament, and it's only when the final result is turned into law and then put into action in the budget that the results of these efforts will be made. But gender equality, as Ms. Hélène Frisson rightly pointed out, is a matter of the long haul. Now, secondly, and I come to that, the tracking of gender expenditure at programme level is critical. I will say much more about that later. And then, we actually have a dedicated program, such as the Daphne strand of the Citizens' Equality, Rights and Values program, which, as Commissioner Dalli recalled, as a result also of Parliament's insistence, was significantly increased. This has a very significant impact in terms of having tools in the budget that really target gender equality. We're also working on building a systematic data catalogue that allows us to identify available information and data gaps so that we can, on that basis, have a much better empirical basis going forward for assessing the effects of EU financing on gender equality. And finally, maybe it is a little bit practical and operational, but I would like to really pay a tribute to the work of EIGE and the European University Institute, who are assisting us with setting up specialized training programs for staff. At the end of the day, if we are to take this seriously, we need to equip our colleagues with the necessary skills and tools, and that's why this training program is really important. So as you see, we are working on laying the foundations. We are taking a long-term perspective. This is not something that will be achieved tomorrow. It will not even be achieved at the end of this budgetary cycle. It's something that we have to anchor in the budgetary approach for the very long haul, resulting obviously in very concrete steps that are taken, allowing Parliament, Council to monitor progress. Now, if you allow me, next slide, please, to say a word about our tracking methodology. As I said, what gets measured normally gets done. Therefore, this is really, I think, very critical. We apply the tracking approach to many important policy priorities, such as the fight against climate change, biodiversity, and I think gender clearly needs to be brought to a similar level of maturity in terms of tracking in the budget. Now, obviously, if we talk about the contribution the EU budget makes to gender equality, in reality, as this slide shows, this is an amalgamation of the contribution of different programs. Some programs, this is purely illustrative, as you can see, like Programme 1 in this example, will contribute a lot. Others are much less significant from a gender equality perspective, such as in this example, Programme 2. But we need to look at that very systematically to come to a meaningful overall judgment on the contribution the EU budget brings. And as already recalled, we will start, as per the IIA agreement, with an approach based at programme level, looking in the first instance at those programs we manage ourselves directly. So if we go to the next slide, we will be pushing forward the tracking through the development of a methodology which we have committed to should be available for centrally managed programs on a selective basis in 2023. Now, given the importance of this matter, and also in light of what was said about possibly the effects of the crisis on gender equality, we are trying in DG Budget to advance this, to speed up the work, so that maybe we will already next year be able to show some first results. And I would like to keep Parliament and the colleagues who work more particularly on this fully involved in this matter. So we hope that today's meeting is part of an ongoing dialogue with the protagonists of gender budgeting going forward. If we have the next slide, please. I would like maybe to say a word about the Recovery and Resilience Facility to which Ms. Marquez already referred. Obviously, that's a huge spending program which should lay the foundations for a durable and resilient recovery. And we have tried in the design of the RRF, and Parliament has in the negotiations on the RRF strengthened this to anchor gender mainstreaming in this program as well. So the plans need to explain how they contribute to gender equality and equal opportunities for all, whilst that requirement is important. I must personally say that I'm not fully satisfied as a citizen with the extent to which this subject has been covered extensively. But I am hopeful that as we look at the results, based on reporting requirements that will be laid down in a delegated act, we will nevertheless, even if it's imperfect, have a good first example of a centrally managed program of critical importance that contributes to gender equality, because we will, for the first time, have a tracking system that will give us some information about the impact on gender equality. So the RRF should be seen, in my view, as a first important step, but clearly it is only a first step at this juncture. Which brings me maybe to my last slide, which gives you an overview of the long path of advancing gender mainstreaming in the EU budget. You can see the road travelled since December 2019, when Mrs. Dalli was appointed as the first Equality Commissioner, the appointment of the Equality Task Force in January 2020, and the adoption of the Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025, which was completed on the 5th of March 2020. Then I think the interinstitutional agreement, as far as the budget is concerned, really marks a very important anchor and milestone, which was, of course, achieved in December of last year. And the delivery on the commitments under this agreement has started this year with the communication on better regulation, which referred to the importance of integrating gender in impact assessments. That was done in April of this year. We are planning, as I said, to test the gender equality tracking methodology next year, and we have committed to applying it by 2023, even if I have just said that we will try to do what we can to advance matters, at least on a selected basis. Which brings us then to the review in 2024 that should teach us what is working and inform the direction of travel going forward. I hope to have underlined our very strong commitment here in DG Budget to this strategy. We see it as something for the long haul. We know we're in here for something that will really contribute not just to values, but also to prosperity, and we're strongly committed to realizing it in practice. Thank you very much.
Merci, Gert-Jan. Je voulais vraiment remercier votre présentation. Je dois dire que ça n'a pas été le point le plus difficile à accorder dans le cadre des négociations du cadre financier pluriannuel, mais effectivement, nous avons devant nous un défi énorme pour transformer ce qui a été un acquis politique et un compromis politique entre les institutions européennes pour qu'effectivement le budget de l'Union puisse contribuer pour promouvoir l'égalité hommes-femmes et promouvoir le gender budgeting. Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. Je suis sûre que plusieurs points que vous avez soulevés seront discutés pendant notre temps de débat. Maintenant, je passe la parole à l'expert de l'OECD. Je remercie Monsieur Jon Blondal pour votre participation à ce séminaire. L'OCDE a beaucoup avancé dans le débat sur les méthodologies de gender budgeting et donc vous avez la parole pour partager avec nous ce que sont les progrès que l'OCDE a déjà eu dans le cadre de cette problématique. Merci. The floor is yours.
Mr. Blondal, you can please press the speak button at the bottom of the page.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, we've been having some technical problems today, and I'm sorry that I'm only joining you by audio. But it's thank you very much, Margarita, for your introduction. Thank you very much to the S&D group for the invitation and to all the speakers and all the delegates joining us. I am very pleased to say this morning that there has never been a better time for gender budgeting in OECD countries. We have been working on this issue for many, many years at the OECD, and there has been many breakthroughs recently. So it is a very fortuitous moment to be taking this on because the environment is very positive. And I think the number one reason why the environment is so positive is that there is a much greater understanding of what gender budgeting is. Many people have a certain view of gender budgeting, that it is about creating a separate his or her budget with equal amounts for his and her, that it should be divided equally. That was a very common understanding of what was meant by gender budgeting in the past, and that greatly hampered the advancement of gender budgeting. That discussion, as we've seen evidenced by the previous speakers, has advanced greatly in recent years. And the understanding is now, the more common understanding is that it is all about budget impact analysis, how different programs affect women and men differently. And that is an absolutely fundamental change in the approach that people have about gender budgeting when you discuss it with them. The second thing is to highlight that it is not about the immediate budget outlays. It is very much about the secondary and third order effects of the budget. And if I take a simple example of a construction project, you will have people working on the actual building site. There may well be more men than women on the actual building site. That is the first order effect, but countries need to move beyond that. You need to look at who are the beneficiaries of the project. Is the actual construction, the beneficiaries of that project, are they disproportionately men, or is there equality, or is it in fact focused more on women? And then the key to it is the third order effect. What does having this project in place allow for the overall outcomes, well-being and economic outcomes? So for example, and which is a key consideration when we're discussing gender budgeting, does it allow for a greater participation of women in the labor force? Because that brings me to the other point that I would like to highlight for why gender budgeting is now a more commonly discussed and more advanced concept in OECD countries, because the focus is very much increasingly on the economic effect. The social justice aspect, the equality aspects, they are just taken as a given. They are accepted. The countries that are most advanced in this have moved beyond that to focus their arguments specifically on the economic aspects of gender budgeting. Most of our societies in OECD countries and in EU countries are facing with rapidly aging populations, such as shrinking labor force going forward, which is very much an key economic challenge facing our countries going forward. Using gender budgeting effectively to support policies that would allow for the greater participation of women in the labor market will I mean, it depends in different countries, the effect is, but it can have an incredible impact on these long-term economic models for these countries. So it is very much the key to the success and the acceptance of gender budgeting among a wider group of people is that you take the social justice, you take the equality argument, that is just a given that everybody accepts, but to move it beyond that, you focus on the economic aspects of it. Now, if I move a little bit into some of the practical aspects of doing this, the budget community is also quite lucky in a sense that it has a culture of performance and results. There is a culture of evaluation. This is certainly the case with the European Union and regarding its spending. So gender budgeting and analyzing the gender impacts of budgets, it has a ready-made home. There is a community that is used to the terminology and concepts of evaluating, of performance, of evaluation. It is not anything brand new to this community. So that is an excellent starting point for countries. Now, when I say that there has never been a better time to be focusing on gender budgeting, I do not mean to say that it is easy. It is a journey for countries to do this. We here at the OECD, our Senior Budget Officials Committee, we have a network of gender budgeting officials that almost sort of provide inspiration for each other, because it is not obvious with all government expenditure what the gender impact is. You almost need to overcome a certain way of thinking that you would assume that certain aspects, there is no gender, certain programs, there is no gender aspect to them. But working together as a community, you start to see that you can, in fact, even for infrastructure programs, see a distinctive gender aspect to them. How countries are applying this in practice is generally that you require budget submissions for new expenditure to have a gender impact statement. That this shows they have done the analysis of how the new budget proposal will impact women and men differently. This is good by itself, of course, but it is also, it hardwires the gender issues into the policy process through the budget process, because it is all well and good to talk about gender issues, but as one of our previous speakers said, the budget is all about turning words into action. And by having the budget submissions, a mandatory gender impact statement attached to them, you are hardwiring that into the policy process through the budget process. And that is a fundamental achievement in countries that are very advanced in this. The challenge here lies in the fact that this has largely been focused on new expenditure, the incremental new expenditures every year, that it's the baseline of existing expenditure, which is the vast majority, of course, of total expenditure in countries. The challenge is to apply this gender perspective to that. And we are now developing at the OECD in cooperation with our countries, ways of integrating a gender perspective into the spending review process that our countries have. And just to conclude, sort of on the final challenge, and this was mentioned by previous speakers, especially Director General Koopman, is getting good data on this information. Gender disaggregated data is not readily available in certain areas. There have been great strides made in this, mandating statistical offices to collect gender disaggregated data. But it's also that once we're going down this, to take, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. That, don't say we can't do this because we don't have perfect data. If you have data that is that you are confident that is giving you the right information, go with it rather than wait, and with the acknowledgement that this will improve over time. As I mentioned, it's a journey, rather than having the lack of complete data stop you. So on that, I would like to conclude. I thank you again, and I apologize for the technical issues, but countries are at different places in moving down the gender budgeting journey, but I think this is something that we are all very much committed to, and there are a lot of success stories out there that can inspire all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jon, for your presentation. I need to say that without image, the interpret can't interpret. So we have not the the French interpretation. But I wish that everybody could understand the presentation of Mr. Jon Blondal. The OECD has identified, as Mr. Blondal said, gender budgeting as a key tool of a system-wide government approach to deliver gender equality outcomes, and has defended that effective implementation of gender budgeting can help redress gender inequalities through raising awareness of how policies included in the budget impact people differently, and prioritizing projects that help close gender gaps. So, thank you very much, Mr. Blondal, for your presentation. And before to move to the last speaker, I'd like to remember that all the participants can ask the floor, raising your hand or in the chat, or writing a question in the chat. So I move to Helena Moraes Maceira, and I would like to give the floor to you. Helena Moraes Maceira is an official of the European Agency for Gender Equality. AG has been a key partner in the road for the developing of a methodology for gender mainstreaming in the EU budget. The agency has developed a section in its webpage dedicated to gender mainstreaming and assists member states and civil servants to find out how gender equality relates to their respective area of work. It highlights gender challenge in 19 policy areas, ranging from fisheries to culture, and also develops recommendations on how to best address these challenges. Helena, welcome, and thank you very much for your participation. The floor is yours for 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting Neige to this important webinar on gender mainstreaming in the EU budget. Thank you, Ms. Margarida Marquez, for your words, and also to all the speakers as well. I will start by focusing on the state of art on the implementation of the dual approach for gender equality in the EU. Our research, EIGE's research, observed that in the period 2014-2020, in the previous MFF, within the most important EU investment programs, the EU funds under the Common Provision Regulations, the dual approach has been disappearing. There were very few targeted interventions, mainly because there was not a single gender equality objective out of the thematic objectives, 14 at that time, and there were only 2 priorities related to gender equality. Also, although gender equality was a horizontal principle, there was no institutionalized processes to include gender mainstreaming in all programs, and the lack of specific guidelines and gender mainstreaming requirements led to gender-blind funding. Under the current MFF, under the MFF 21-27, Gender equality is a horizontal principle across thematic priorities with no standalone quantitative target. And the novelty, as it has been already said, is the commitment to measure the contribution to gender equality objectives at program level through a gender equality tracking methodology and the reporting of the results annually. In this new budgetary cycle, the EU faces unprecedented challenges, as we all know. EIGE's research evidence shows that COVID-19 has triggered a number of worrying trends that risk disrupting the improvements in gender equality that have been made over the past decades. Translated into budgetary resources, this means that there are risks of negative gender equality impacts of expenditure if gender impact assessments are not considered in the implementation of the recovery strategies. So building on this evidence, EIGE welcomes the efforts that the Commission, led by DG Budget, is putting in the development of a methodology to track gender equality expenditure in the EU budget, because indeed information on gender-related budgetary allocations is central to assessing the implementation of the horizontal principle of gender equality in the MFF. How to develop this methodology is a central question of today's webinar. And I will now focus on 5 challenges that tracking systems, and more specifically, a system that focuses on gender equality poses, and on possible mitigation actions. And here I will turn a little bit more technical, but I think this was also one of the aims of today's webinar. So the first challenge and also mitigation actions that I would discuss with you is the arbitrary setting of markers and the approximation of the calculations. For all us to know, a system to track gender equality spending in the MFF assesses and weights individual programs according to their estimated impact on gender equality objectives. To measure the contribution of programs towards gender equality, minimum and common criteria to assign the markers need to be established in full alignment with the EU framework for gender equality and international standards. Issuing, for example, clear guidelines on how to measure the relevance of gender equality should or could be provided to avoid the arbitrary setting of gender markers and achieve comparability of results. Here, it is very important to underline that gender expertise is crucial in the assessment of the gender relevance of the programs in order to ensure high-quality implementation of those assessment procedures. Ex-ante systems that look at the budget proposals are only able to track relevant activities to a certain extent. Ex-post assessments and deeper analysis at the project level during the program implementation would help approximate real spending for gender equality on a more detailed and verified basis. The second risk is the risk of, or challenge is the risk of subjectivity and overestimation of expenditure. An overestimation or over-reporting of gender equality expenditure can happen if gender equality markers are raised unduly. This is a common feature in systems attempting to track gender equality. Once again, the requirements for demonstrating the relevance of the program or specific measures to the objective being tracked, in this case gender equality, needs to be strict and interpreted by all officials in the same way. Clear guidance and definition of minimum standards is advisable. The third challenge when it comes to gender equality is the do not harm approach. Some priorities could potentially work against gender equality objectives. One example is that in times of COVID-19, investments in sectors with high shares of male employment, such as the digital, energy, construction, and transport industries, might contribute to increasing gender gaps, such as inequalities in employment. So the possibility to use negative markers to capture measures and projects that, of course, unintentionally could work against gender equality by reinforcing, for example, gender stereotypes and therefore widening the gender gaps could be explored. As gender mainstreaming is a transformative strategy to achieve gender equality, which is the overall objective of gender mainstreaming, as we know, or the overall aim, some methodologies for tracking expenditures on gender equality even consider negative markers for interventions that maintain status quo in terms of gender inequalities. The fourth challenge I want to mention today is the overlaps between parallel priorities. Gender equality is multidimensional and interacts with other forms of inequality and grounds of discrimination. So to avoid an overestimation of, in this case, the EU commitment, one should be careful and very precise when appraising gender equality commitments or the equality commitments, as gender equality and other policies facing discrimination, for example, support to minorities or to vulnerable population, could be overlapping. The fifth and final challenge I want to share with you is about the commitments for quantitative targets. In the EU context, other tracking systems developed for other horizontal priorities have been linked to a financial commitment in terms of quantitative target for expenditure allocated to the interventions that are deemed to contribute to the respective policy objectives. Setting overall targets that could form part, it's something that could form part of the second phase after the gender equality tracking system has been put into practice and once the corresponding quantitative information about the results of the system implementation has been collected. Earmarking funds have proved to be effective to increase the acceptability of the systems. To conclude, the coronavirus pandemic has reminded us that gender equality is not a side issue. Effectively mainstreaming gender into the EU budget process poses opportunities to maximize public policy interventions and resource allocation processes to advance gender equality, but also, as it has been said, this would result in longer-term economic and social gains for the EU. EIGE congratulates the work of the Parliament and the Commission in this regard and reiterates its commitments to continue supporting this process, provided that resources are available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. I remember that you can ask the floor in the chat or on the raise a hand in your screen. And we have some written questions. And I start to read the first one. I don't know if Maria Stratigaki, if you want the floor or if you prefer, I read the question, is in the chat. Okay, I read the question. Gender budgeting obligation for RRF is very weak. There is no requirement for ex-ante review or formal conditionality rules for programs and projects to be funded. This permits some countries, like Greece, to neglect completely any relevant requirement. As in the case of gender budgeting of EU structural funds, only strict and clear rules can lead to some concrete results. Otherwise, there are always some other priorities to be served. I can understand very well your point. This is a question, first of all, to Mr. Koopman. And I move to a second question in the chat also. in relation to the different financing programs, there are aspects related to the indicators and targets that have to be very well planned when we want to base an objective and transparent reading understanding of this specific theme. First, in terms of EC databases, where beneficiaries are required to indicate information about their project, is this specific information request? Are the technicians from the different programs who monitor and evaluate these projects and who subsequently report to the Commission able to determine indicators to provide a reading of gender budgeting specifically? And a third question, this is not a third question, this is an information that the Committee of the Regions will organize also a debate. So I give the floor to Gertian to answer to the question, to these two questions, and if anyone wants to take the floor, a panelist, you can take the floor afterwards. Mr. Kuppen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Margarida. Thank you very much, Ms. Marquez, and thank you for the questions. As far as the RRF is concerned, I already, I think, indicated that the requirements in the regulation are to be considered, in my view, as a first step towards gender budgeting. But clearly, the weaknesses which the chat has identified, so the question in the chat has identified, are real. I'm not pretending that this is a fully fledged and satisfactory system, because the scrutiny on the actual implementation is limited, and the possibilities to validate technically even the ex ante indications is also somewhat limited. I think we need to recognize the conditions under which the RRF was put in place, and we need, I think, to accompany the implementation over the next years by emphasizing the importance of this matter and following it up at all the necessary levels. But we need to be realistic. The regulation doesn't require the minimum necessary inputs to have a top-class, fully fledged gender budgeting framework for this tool. So we should, in my view, and I come now to the second point, recognize that if we do this seriously, it is a matter of a change in culture, a process where we will need to build an infrastructure that is not going to be achieved in a few months or even a few years. So I think what is essential for the methodology that we develop is that, as the question identifies, the people who will have to follow up and implement it are actually equipped with the necessary information and are properly trained. And this is very much what we are aiming for, as I have already explained. So the pilots which we will be running for the methodology will need to pay due attention to this, and the people involved with it in terms of its implementation will need to receive the necessary training. So these are all very important points of attention, which are, I can assure you, very much on our radar screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gertiane. I'd like also to thank Claudia Teixeira Gomes and Maria Stratigaki, who asked the previous questions. And I move to my colleague, Maria Manuel Leitão Marques. Maria Manuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Margarida. Thank you, first of all, for the organization of this important debate with so many people interested in this subject. In fact, as OECD told before, all of us have been working for many years in this subject, but we need to recognize without the results we want to achieve. And for the moment, I think it's not a problem of lack of political will, is probably a problem, a technical problem, a problem of methodology to put forward our objectives. And first of all, I would like to refer the lack of data to do this job. We, in frequent meetings this week, we have had with in farm committee with EDGE, with the European Institute for Gender Equality, there has been an unanimous recognition that there is a lack of data about existing gender inequality, such as in terms of pay, but not only in terms of pay. So to apply gender budgeting, we will need assessment studies, and therefore the budget of European Institute for Gender Equality must be increased so that we have better statistical data to support our decisions. We need to recognize it's not for gender equality. For instance, if you want to have something similar to New Zealand on well-being, that is measure the impact of the budget in terms of well-being, also we need more, that includes gender equality, we need better data, more data and better data. And second, gender budgeting methodology, while important, still lack the recognition in many member states. It is not the case of Portugal. There is another problem, but not this one. My question is how we are working together with member states in this process. And finally, in Portugal, there is a problem. Probably it's not a problem of EU, but I would like to know that is our budget is organized in spending categories or headings. And this make us more difficult to apply a gender perspective. We are trying to move to a budget organized by programs. Is this also a problem at EU level, a technical problem or not? This is my question. Thank you very much to all the speakers and of course to Margarida and SND for organizing this meeting.
Thank you, Maria Manuel. This is, you raised a key point, and this is clear in the report of the Court of Auditors that I mentioned. Only 21.7% of the EU programs had gender-related indicators. So we need to improve, to increase this figure. And I think also that the Court of Auditors gave interesting recommendations to the Commission to have a better performance on that subject, on this subject. So now I have two questions, two written questions, and I will read them. The first is, what is your position on the question of categorizing budget programs, according to which categories should EU programs be classified in the future in order to measure and evaluate the gender dimension, harming, stable, improving? And this question can be to AG and the Commission. And the last question also to the Commission, please could you elaborate on the question how to integrate the gender perspective into performance-based budgeting, and what would be your suggestions for improvement? So I give the floor to Gertiane, and after I give the floor to the other speakers. Gert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for those questions. Maybe on the first one, I would say that a sustained investment in capacity building is going to be necessary. I've already emphasized that in the Commission, but not just in the Commission, also with the Member States, who are, as you know, responsible for assisting with the implementation of 2/3 of the EU budget. And I would say that strong capacity building in the two arms of the budgetary authority is also necessary. I see EIGE playing an important role, and as I indicated already providing very precious support to us in terms of training programs and strategic advice. I think on this question of whether the assessment on a program level is problematic from a gender perspective, I would actually say it helps, because whilst we will clearly have a methodology that is going to apply to all programs, I'm sure that the depth of the assessments will vary a little bit in function of the programs, and the extent to which we can really drill deeper will depend on programs in terms of their gender relevance. Not just the first order effects, as Mr. Blondel from the OECD has mentioned, but also further downstream. So, with the limited resources, any budget implementation body has having a series of programs that are particularly pertinent on the radar, and being able to drill deeper there is going to be important. I should say that in the other tracking approaches we follow, for example, in biodiversity, we do very much the same, so that overall we concentrate our resources, obviously based on a consistent cross-budget methodology on those programs where it matters most. Now, building that capacity, as I indicated, will be a matter of years. The pilots I have referred to for direct management programs will be advanced as much as we can. And I think once we actually do this concretely, we will have a different type of debate, because then it will become a matter of assessing something that the Commission has put forward, which is currently not yet available. Final point from my side, tracking expenditure is only the beginning of a performance-based budgeting approach, because obviously we will have to work through all the way to effects, to impact and results. And that is an even more relevant and pertinent endpoint for our assessment, which will have to build on these steps. We first need to know what we're actually spending. We will then need to have proper evaluation, and we will have to have indicators built into the frameworks that allow us to actually do this assessment. At the end of the day, the objective more generally of DG Budget is to be sure that performance-related information feeds back into the budget cycle, so that programs that are not delivering can be addressed, can be improved, or if they cannot be improved, then their budget allocation has to be reduced, whereas programs that perform very well should clearly be prioritized. That's ultimately the budget cycle we want, and that is clearly something which will help the budget address policy priorities more fully. We are at the start of a journey to achieve this as far as gender is concerned, but we're very clear about where we want to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Gert, for your reaction. So I move to the OECD. Mr. Blondel, you have the floor, if you want to react.
Back up or reiterate and agree with the comments that have been made, that moving from an input-based budget to a program-based to a performance and results-based budgeting is of course a key to this, and that will allow us to more easily and more readily implement gender budgeting. I think my main comment here is I sense that there is, we talk about developing capacity, which I very much agree with, but I think it's also key that we need to have this mainstreamed in the budget process, that this becomes one of the features of performance budgeting in general, that we don't create a separate system for gender budgeting, because it may give a boost at the very beginning, but is probably not very sustainable. I think a much better investment is the existing performance and results budgeting systems, to incorporate this into them. As I mentioned, there is a culture of evaluation, there is a culture of all of these assessments, and just to add this perspective to that, rather than creating a separate apparatus just focused on gender issues. I think that would be my main comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blondal. So now I give the floor to Helena Moraes Maceira if you want to react to answer to one question and to react to the others if you wish.
Mrs. Moraes Maceira, if you can please press the speak button one time.
Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you very much. Just to react to the question of the specific categories, the markers, and so on. Well, I would say that as this is already, it turns into a very, very technical discussion because we would need to go one by one and assess the different options. Maybe just to reiterate that it would be important to ensure that the proposals are fully aligned with the framework for gender equality and the international standards in this regard. And then of course lessons learned from previous experiences and markers that have been used before by other countries or organizations. And for example, I just introduced the aspect of possibility to use or to capture also negative impacts in terms of increasing gender inequalities or even the weight that we would give to those programs that do not have an objective to advance gender equality, but rather just keep the status quo in terms of gender inequalities. So those are more fundamental aspects from the perspective of international standards. And what it would be very important once let's say the markers are agreed and the final categories are agreed, is that those are accompanied by, for example, minimum standards, common criteria to assign those markers, clear guidelines on how to really measure the relevance of gender equality to make sure that then the results are comparable and are sound. And here, of course, as it has been said before, gender expertise would be crucial in the assessment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helena. So we arrived at the end of the Q&A point. So I move to the last point, the conclusion. And I give the floor to Evelyn Reiner. Evelyn, she's Austrian. She's the Austrian MEP and chair of the FAM committee. Equality matters and gender mainstreaming are very close to Evelyn's heart. Evelyn, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and really a big thank you, Margarita, for organizing this event today, which is so important. I would like to sum up very briefly, of course, what you said, but sum up as the conclusions. We need both. We need a political strategy of the Commission towards all European, including all European institutions. So a political strategy, including everything what you have mentioned right now. And we need to be detailed, very precise, because it has to be appreciated so much of what you, Margarita, have done, what I there of during the RFF, MFF negotiations, so much to include gender equality, but gender equality must not remain only a title. It has to be, as the title of this today's debate shows, included into a strategy with a methodology that is really going straight ahead. So, starting points, the ECA report, which was really more or less very, very critical and saying a lot has to be done. And you were all referring to it right now. We are aware, I mean, when we're talking about gender equality, we're talking about fundamental right, we're talking about a core value, we're talking about really Article 2.3 of the European Treaty, and most of you have referred to that in your presentations. But a lot has to be done yet, and I think everybody of us has studied quite well what the ECA was demanding from the European institutions. So we're in mid of the whole issue of how the methodology should look like. So therefore, of course, congratulations to the Commission that we have, and Mr. Koopman was showing all that gender equality strategy. I mean, the tracking issues. So you showed very, very well what has been done by the Commission, and we would like to support that. Also, what Helena Dalli, our Commissioner, was referring to, that yes, we have the task force. Yes, the Commission is developing a methodology and asks the member states to take gender equality at the heart of the national action plans. But we have to be blunt. I mean, that's all nice. We know about how member states are more or less blurring and putting maybe the topic of gender equality into the title, but then when it's coming to the methodology, then they are just getting weaker. And insofar, it was highly to be appreciated on the clear messages you were giving us to us, Mr. Koopman, right now on how the tracking of gender expenditure work is starting, but you mentioned it as well too. This is a first step. It's not perfect. And when we are looking right now at the national action plans, I can already say to you, member states again are forgetting, and therefore it is so important that develop exactly not only the tracking approach in the budget, but as our fantastic colleague from EIGE, as always, is presenting, this has to go into the detail. So somehow, when we look at how the whole system should look like, so clear guidelines on how to measure gender equality, the possibility to track the negative marker, and of course the financial commitment on targets. Because when right now looking at the next year's European budget, I just can tell you most of the committees, even in the European Parliament, are not emphasizing enough gender equality. Mr. Blond from OECD mentioned it's the best moment right now because the commitment is already existing in the heads. So we are talking now not about if we are doing gender budgeting, if we are going into gender mainstreaming and the methodology. The question is how intensive. And therefore, I just would like to sum up what most of you mentioned right now. It's about data, gender disaggregated data. So EIGE, we need you more than ever. Commission, please do your job. Training, because it's important. It's not important, it's essential that in the European institutions, Commission, Parliaments, Council, get this training in order to use the tools we are proposing right now, but above all also to include member states. Because here again it is, when you just look at national action plans or in the whole MFF, yes, so much money when we're talking, for example, about financing remote areas is again going in restoring streets and classic men's jobs, which is important, okay. But what about these effects, especially women have with the COVID crisis in the care sector, which we need so much to be built on, and all this has to be reflected in the tools. So I sum up again, we need a political strategy of the European Commission. So not only bits and pieces as we have it right now, fantastic members of the European Parliament, dedicated functionaire in the Commission, European institution, fighters for women's rights in the NGOs. This has to be included by the Commission as a political strategy, including the instruments that have been presented today. And I can assure you in the FAM committee and of course also in the Gender Mainstreaming Network, we'll fight for that. So thank you very much for really going into detail, because one thing is the political strategy. Yes, it is needed, but then it has to be really precise, because otherwise in the funds and the programs of the European Union, somehow it won't be reflected. And it It has to, because we would like to get a plus from the next ECA's report when it's about gender mainstreaming.
Merci Evelyne, merci pour ton intervention et aussi pour ce travail conjoint qu'on a fait depuis le début entre les socialistes à la commission des budgets et à la commission femmes. Je pense qu'effectivement, nous devons travailler ensemble pour développer, pour finalement atteindre cet objectif qu'on a fixé dans le cadre des négociations du cadre financier pluriannuel 21-27, mais il faut travailler au fur et à mesure que le programme se développe. C'est-à-dire, ce n'est pas seulement à la fin, en 2027, qu'on va tirer la conclusion que finalement, on a fait très peu de progrès. Il faut insister pour que les progrès puissent développer tout au long des 7 ans du cadre financier pluriannuel. Et c'est pourquoi je remercie vivement le directeur général Koopman, Monsieur Bondael et Madame Messieda, and also Hélène and Evelyne, d'avoir accepté de participer à ce débat. Ce débat a été très inspirateur, nous a donné des idées pour avancer avec le budget, avec la capacité d'utiliser le budget de l'Union pour avancer dans la participation des femmes dans la société, dans l'économie, dans le monde de la culture, etc. Effectivement, nous avons besoin de toutes ces dimensions et de tout ce travail ensemble. Et j'aime bien, je trouve qu'on travaille très bien entre les socialistes qui sont dans la commission des budgets et dans la commission femmes. Avant de terminer notre débat et pour clôturer cet webinaire, je donne la parole à la commissaire Dalli. C'est un petit détail. Madame la commissaire a dû sortir de la réunion déjà, mais je voulais aussi lui remercier d'avoir partagé avec nous ce que sont les enjeux et ce qui est son agenda politique en tant que commissaire responsable pour l'égalité entre hommes et femmes. Donc, je remercie tout le monde de votre participation. Peut-être la prochaine réunion qu'on organise sur ce sujet, on aura déjà la possibilité d'avoir plus de participants en présence physique dans la salle, mais pour cette fois encore, on a dû se limiter à la participation online. Donc, je remercie tout le monde, les panélistes, les participants, et j'aimerais vous dire que vous nous avez donné des bonnes contributions pour aller de l'avant avec notre travail. Merci beaucoup à tous et à toutes.